Fallout New Vegas is okay. The title is obviously quite provocative towards any diehard fan of this game, but that doesn't mean I think the game is holistically bad or anything like that. If you'd like to hear about all the things this game does well, H.Bomberguy, as well as several billion others, have extensive videos cataloging those ingenuities. I recommend H.Bomberguy's because I liked it, and I don't have the time or energy to see every repetitive iteration of glaze applied to this game. Besides, if you're on Video Essay YouTube, you've probably already seen it. For this video, you can assume I broadly agree with that hour and a half of monologue, that way I don't have to just say all of the same things over again. At points of disagreement, I'll make a note of it. There are a few. Regardless, this game does have some novelties that should not be ignored, but I'm not interested in retreading that ground. It's not quite my style. I think this game has been sufficiently praised for all its existence and then some. Finally looking at this game's structural issues has been long overdue. So long overdue that I've written this script with great apprehension. After all, what are the odds that I would be the first person, that I know of at least, to consider cataloging grievances with this game in a video essay? Am I wrong for not finding it appealing? Am I crazy for trying to get into it and failing several times throughout my youth? No, probably not. I watched a video essay the other week lamenting the plot of Mass Effect 2, one of my favorite games of all time, an opinion shared by many, and that video was really good. The guy had a great point. Mass Effect 2 may have great storytelling on a mission-to-mission basis, all of the characters are very engaging and interesting, but the game completely fails in building the narrative of stopping the Reapers from the previous game, and fails to set up the third game's plot for success. I can still like Mass Effect 2, and also recognize that, yeah, when you look at it from a higher level, there are some narrative issues deep within its bones. These two thoughts can exist in harmony with each other. Likewise, Fallout New Vegas has its own laundry list of problems. Problems that I hope developers of the IP could be cognizant of if they ever get around to Fallout 5. And before you make any assumptions on what the content of this video will look like, I actually won't talk about the graphics, bugginess, or how clunky the gunplay is. Those ones are strawmen. You don't need me to tell you that the graphics are beyond outdated. You already knew that, and I don't really care about graphics. And sure, I think the Sarsaparilla Star quest hooks were a little overtuned. Those complaints would be useless nitpicks, and I'm not interested in being the next CinemaSins. This game's popularity is not lost on me, but please, just hear me out. You can crucify me after I finish yapping. Maybe, just maybe, I'll say something interesting. Because the truth is, the game was mid from the start. I'm not saying that to be facetious, by the way. My very first criticism is for the very first minute of the game. Let's rewind a little bit. That cutscene with Benny is quite good for setting up a plot. Who is this guy? What's that chip? What's his interest in the chip? Who does he work for? Why does he need to kill me for it? There are many questions that are immediately engaging. This is the opening for the game that so many people love. Except that's not the opening. There's another opening so pointless that you may have forgotten about it.
As decades passed, what had been the American Southwest united beneath the flag of the new California Republic.
You start the game with a full exposition of the factions in New Vegas, their values, their history of conflict, and the current sit-rep. And for what? This is a role-playing game with mountains of dialogue. How did they forget the show don't tell principle we all learned in early high school? This exposition monologue is completely irrelevant to the Benny scene, and therefore irrelevant to the player's interests for the first chunk of the game. An ongoing war that you have no stake in is not something the player needs to be hearing immediately upon starting the game. Giving the player that whole plot dump for something they were already going to organically learn later as they travel on their hunt for Benny just feels wasteful of the player's attention. Hearing rumors of the Legion encroaching on NCR territory is much more foreboding when you haven't already seen their encampment included on a Google Slides presentation. The core intrigue to start is Benny. The faction conflict will have their screen time, but you're jumping the gun. And I didn't need a slideshow to tell me I'm a courier. I could figure that out from Benny telling me I made my last delivery, and most of Goodsprings then saying, "Oh, you must be that courier that Doc Mitchell patched up." Openings are important for setting the tone, and the slideshow is not a good aid for this. The game would simply be better if it was omitted entirely. Following the opening, you wake up in Doc Mitchell's house.
Whoa, easy there, easy.
You walk over to the Vigor Tester to select your character's special stats, and those are fine. They're fine. They prime you to think about how you're going to play the game. I like it. From there, you sit down with the doc and select your skills. I vehemently do not like these. These are not as well implemented as many people say they are, although I will concede they aren't bad by any means. They are actually an improvement over all previous entries. That doesn't mean they're good. Listen, I have a lot of gripes. Some of my gripes are just intrinsic to the system. Other gripes are specific to this game's implementation of the system, issues I think they could have improved upon within the bounds. The skill selection list is deeply uncompelling, mainly because whenever you play, you can whittle down the reasonable choices very quickly, too quickly, such that it corrodes the integrity of the whole system. I really want you to consider just how unengaging this list is and how you interpreted this when you played. If you're wanting to be a gunslinger, you choose between flavoring your gunshots as bang bang sounds or pew pew sounds. If you're wanting to be bulky instead, you also make an arbitrary choice between unarmed and melee. There goes another option. And you're rarely choosing the strength and gunslinger simultaneously, so right away, 3 options are immediately cut. They're irrelevant to the players now. Explosives are the weird third category because explosives are materially expensive and also very unwieldy in this game. Grenades aren't very good, especially in VATS, and you aren't likely to be getting decent explosive weaponry like missile launchers until mid to late game. It's generally easier to just do anything else. You also can't be solely reliant on explosives in fights due to just how many enemies there are that rush you, so you would need to supplement it with another offensive skill. It's an expensive, limited, not always fun choice. What you're left with is a few very solid options, like speech or sneaking, and then left with many more very boring options. Medicine is a very boring skill. Improving the healing from items is not an exciting selection, even if it may be mechanically sound. The same can be said of barter, repair, and survival. Oh yippee, I unlocked the ability to cook a decent steak. Why would I ever choose that over improving my ability to hit people with hammers? Even the perks related to these boring skills are completely underwhelming. You're left with one offensive skill, speech because it's really useful, science because you want to open terminals, don't you? Lockpicking because you want to open doors, and maybe sneak, which is okay, I guess. Midway through writing the first draft of this script, I rewatched H.Bomberguy's video a little more seriously to check for discrepancies, and hoo boy I found them, but guess which options he was putting the most points into. Great minds think alike, I guess. If players are being put in situations where, on the whole, most of them are going to make the same choice, they're not really being given an interesting choice. I didn't write that line. This quote will come up again later. Note that he already has all of the essentials nearly maxed out at level 16. This game is ridiculously liberal with giving you skill points, and that's not including the level cap increase to 50 from all of the DLCs. H.Bomberguy speaks about skill points as though they are a scarce commodity that needs to be planned out to get the perks that you want. I call bullshit. By the end of the game, you end up putting points into useless crap because there's literally nothing left. You maxed out all of the skills you wanted by level 20. Choosing skills is much more meaningful when you aren't given the option of all of them. If there is no mutual exclusivity, you're not really making a choice. And to make matters worse, these skills are awful for meaningful roleplay. These are all very generic wasteland survival skills. Being proficient in lockpicking, repair, or survival are very poor for defining the character of a wastelander. Everyone who survives in the Mojave will have these skills in some way or another. Choosing any of these skills does not provide reason to behave differently. Speaking in generalities, skills should serve as an augmentation to the roleplay experience. To give an example, when I play Morrowind, I select specific skills to be my specialties. In doing so, I'm defining traits about my character that differentiates them. If I select all magical skills, I'm probably not going to be very involved with the Fighters Guild. These aren't just saying what I'm good at, they're specifying some of my motivations and behaviors. In Fallout, being good at science, as vague as that is, does little to provide character motivation. Seriously, if you choose science as a tagged skill, How are you approaching problems differently, aside from sometimes having an extra dialogue option that pops up and surprises you? At the end of the day, you're not making different choices. You just occasionally get to pass speech checks with skills that aren't speech. Science is the skill for opening terminals, and little more than that. It really is a shame this game's skill system is so messy, because using skills other than speech for flat checks and dialogue is a legitimate innovation that they could have gone much further with. I can say nice things about this game. Flat checks demolish save-scumming behavior, and instead of secretly calculating the success in the background, it's explicit in communicating what players need to succeed. These dialogue options are supposed to tell the player you could have solved this problem in a different way if you had this kind of build, which I think is a very cool idea to try to implement. However, due to skill point inflation, the choices in New Vegas read to me as come back to this dialogue in a few levels once you have another 100 points distributed. These skill checks are not reflections of who the courier is, just reflections of the courier's level progression. In the early game, this system feels somewhat balanced, but by late game you just have access to every option, all of the time. This issue is amplified by just how weak the influence of special is on skills. Your special stats influence your default value of your skills, but that's it. From there, special doesn't have any impact at all in the context of dialogue. So even if I have a charisma stat of 1, I can boost my speech or barter to 100 pretty easily. I should not be passing barter 100 checks with a charisma of 1. Hell, I shouldn't be passing barter 30 checks. And yet, I'm able to launch that skill into the stratosphere and pretend that it's normal. Let's take a quick look at Disco Elysium to see how this could have been done differently. Like New Vegas, you have skill checks that frequently appear in dialogue, both actively as dialogue options, but also as passive checks, which provide you additional information and dialogue options when you pass them. You can even retry skill checks later after failing them the first time. The influence of New Vegas is exceedingly clear here. However, in Disco Elysium, your skills are strongly tied to your stats to begin with, and remain that way for the rest of the game. If I have a bronze stat of 5, all of the skills related to that begin with a value of 5. You can increase those skills by increments of 1 with skill points. However, the number of times you can increase that skill is capped by your base stat value. If I have a motorics stat of 1, the most I can increase the motorics related skills is by 1, leaving me with a maximum of a +2 bonus, not even half of the total of my bronze stat without any investment at all. You cannot have all skills, and only a few can rise to high levels with deep investment. This system encourages the player to invest highly in the skills they want, because even the high defaults only get you past medium level skill checks. This game doesn't hand out skill points like candy, which makes their investment that much more meaningful. Different experiences are absolutely mutually exclusive, so every time you level up, you are making a meaningful choice. In New Vegas, when the experience meter makes another cycle, you're just funneling points into the skills you established you wanted at level 1. From there, you move on to the perks, where you can make actual meaningful choices. These skills blow, and I do not fault Bethesda for entirely scrapping them and trying something different in Fallout 4. They obviously didn't fix the roleplay experience with their simplification. This is modern Bethesda after all, but they didn't hurt it much either with their perk tree. There just wasn't much there to begin with in the skills domain. What actually hurt was lame writing and complete destruction of agency, but that's a separate thing entirely. You can find plenty of other videos about that topic. Anyway, now that we've shredded up the foundational system of this beloved game, we can finally leave Doc Mitchell's house. That's right, we were here the whole time. Sorry for talking your ear off, Doc. From here, the objectives are clear. We hang around in Good Springs for a bit, and then journey out to hunt down Benny, fulfilling our singular character motivation. We only have one character motivation because the courier is an unwritten character. Aside from being shot in the head on a delivery, we're a complete and total blank slate. No connections to hold the players down, no ideals to restrict the player and their unlimited agency to commit to whatever they want. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that cool? I wonder why no one ever copies this and you only ever see it in Bethesda games. Having no background seems like a really great idea that would have absolutely no drawbacks in a roleplay setting. It may not look like it at a glance, but this is easily the Achilles heel of the entire game, and this factor is actually responsible for many of this game's flaws. I can already smell the disbelief. After all, so many people dream of being someone other than the protagonist they were so unfortunately assigned at the beginning of so many role-playing games. And I don't really mean to dismiss that desire. Like, It makes sense to want that. That's the way it's meant to be in traditional tabletop roleplay. But it's misguided to ever expect that from video games. Like, I get it. Maybe you don't want to explore the galaxy of Mass Effect as a human military commander. There are probably countless amazing stories to be told in this IP. But they only wrote one. The writers don't get to rewrite their stories on a session-to-session basis to dynamically meet the player's actions and choices. Writing stories that center on characters that were crafted to fit that story is a limitation of this medium, but it's a limitation that ought to be respected. Every story needs characters that fit the setting. Defining humanity's place in a cosmic society and stopping the threat of an ancient group of genocidal leviathans, not a role for the everyman. They only had time to write one story, so you play the character that is thematically best suited to tell it. The fact that you are Commander Shepard is what allows for coherence. There may be details that are intrinsic to your character, but you as the player have the authority to make decisions beyond that background. You get to roleplay as an interesting character that belongs. In New Vegas, you don't belong. You are only a courier on a mysterious package delivery with no history to speak of. You have no ties, no allegiances, you aren't the chosen one. There is quite actually nothing noteworthy about you other than being shot in the head. People call you the courier, but that's more of a name than something that actually defines you. You are a generic wastelander, the perfect everyman. As far as role-playing games go, you should never want to be just nobody, because when you are, the writing suffers for it. For clarity, I would like to specify that when I say nobody, I mean someone with no background, not someone with low ability and unknown reputation, although the courier does belong to both groups. After all, many people love stories where you come from nothing and make something of yourself. A good example of someone with low status and reputation, but still maintaining a background, is Henry of Skalitz from Kingdom Come Deliverance. He can't read, he isn't very bright, and he's really goddamn puny. He's differentiated from a nobody like the courier by his background. He is a peasant, or blacksmith's son to be more precise. This is a very important detail. In feudal society, he is of a lower class, and his lack of title says a lot about him. His class background is a major point of contention throughout the entire story, like in his rivalry with the nobleman Hans. If Henry were part of the upper class, it would be a very different story. Meanwhile, the courier doesn't have any of these discriminating characteristics. Perhaps I shouldn't say that you don't fit in. Rather, you fit in perfectly, without friction. That doesn't make for interesting writing. How are the denizens of the world meant to connect with you or take issue with you if there's nothing particular about you at all? It'd be wrong to call the courier vanilla, because vanilla is actually a flavor, despite its status as the default. No, you're much more like distilled water. You don't necessarily need a robust, flavorful history like Commander Shepard or Henry, but you need something to differentiate yourself from everyone else. In Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, you are an unwritten character. There's only one NPC in the whole game that ever makes reference to your past before the events of the game, and even then, it tries to stay vague as possible. It's quite cool. But you still have discriminating characteristics. You have a bloodline connecting you to a clan, and you aren't just some vampire. You're a new vampire. The other vampires in LA recognize you as an inexperienced fledgling, and many don't show any respect to you because of the generational hierarchy. You may be an unwritten character without any connections or pre-established convictions, but your character is grounded in the world in a way that others can recognize. In New Vegas, there is no grounding to speak of, so NPCs aren't left with much to talk about. They can't have a gripping conversation with someone who they can't relate to, aside from the courier also being a wastelander. Have you ever tried having a conversation with a stranger and they didn't have any traits other than being human? You might not know it, but your answer should be no. These people literally cannot exist. Anyone watching this video, even the most boring, miserable fucks, are guaranteed to have a stronger, more interesting background than the courier, the protagonist of the role-playing video game. So, to reflect this, the game's dialogue completely revolves around the courier asking questions and interrogating others. This isn't new to role-playing games, it's the standard actually. It's just much less flavorful when the characters never bother to ask something back. These NPCs only exist as an extension of world building, not as an extension of roleplay, when I believe they should do both. New drinking game for you. Take a shot every time an NPC asks something about you that isn't an immediate segue into a quest. It's a very boring drinking game. Sometimes people actually ask you who you are, and you don't have an answer to that question, and you just begin your interrogation, completely skipping over what should be interesting conversational dialogue.
Didn't know anyone would willingly walk into this place. Not unless they were looking for trouble. What's your story?
It makes me wish I was playing a better game. Like Fallout. Fallout 1's character premise is very simple, but that's all you need. You grew up in a vault, you need to find the water chip. Your character entirely revolves around these two facts, and they make for an excellent foundation. You aren't a nobody, and these intrinsic facts are flexible enough to let you define the character for yourself. When you stroll into town, people ask you your name, and you can choose to withhold that. You're a vault dweller. You don't know or trust these surface-dwelling people, so you might be careful not to identify yourself. When they ask you where you're from, you have an answer to that question, but do you want to disclose that? Saying a secret vault might be dangerous, especially considering you've seen what happens to vaults when they're discovered. It's not like these details are important for the story or get you to the quest faster, but it helps characterize the people you're speaking to, and also helps you characterize who you are. The writers are able to infuse subtext into your dialogue, not just the NPCs, and the characters are written to be reactive to that. It's very cool. I promise you, all of your favorite role-playing games feature reactivity to your intrinsic identity in some way or another, and it's the most magical thing. Meanwhile, in New Vegas, everyone is just champing at the bit to make you go away. They never ask you your name, even though you have one. They give you exposition about themselves, you ask your laundry list of questions about them, and head off in some direction to talk to someone else. You're never really involved in the exchange. There is no relationship to be had, because you really are a goddamn nobody. They never need to ask you anything, because what the hell would you even answer with? The only exceptions to this rule are characters like Benny or Victor, who are participants in defining you as the dead man walking. You actually have a connection to these characters, and it makes for some of the most fun dialogue in the game. Outside of these exceptions, the game generally fails to discriminate you from anyone else. The only other cases have to do with gender, one of the few characteristics that NPCs can make note of. These cases stood out to me because they're so painfully rare. When you visit the Legion camp as a woman, it's genuinely uncomfortable. The Legion is deeply misogynistic, and that alone feels sort of like an understatement.
What do you want from me, woman? I'm in charge of the arena, not the cooking pots.
Haha. Wow, isn't this fun? There's this particular conversation you can have with a slave named Siri.
We're property. If you're too young or too old, the men usually leave you alone. Usually. You ought to be careful yourself. I overheard some of the legionaries talking about trying you out.
I'm not a woman, as you could probably tell, but this conversation really struck me. I felt really grossed out by a simple line of dialogue in an old video game, because my character connected with this woman as recipient of an injustice. Not me. I'm not my character, but this is something that I and other men don't think about very often, because it generally doesn't directly affect us. It's tragic, but that's the truth of the matter. And that's the whole damn point of roleplay. Experiencing that which you ordinarily wouldn't experience, that which you would not consider. Even if by proxy it can be meaningful. It's a real shame that New Vegas has so few of these moments. And I'm not saying that every single NPC should just say, "Oh my god, it's a woman, I'm misogynistic." No. It would just be nice if there were other tangible details about your character that NPCs could regard. Roleplay is done through connections, not just prancing about in a sandbox and saying you're a hero. When I play Cyberpunk, I'm not just some gangster with no background. I'm V. I have loyalties and connections to interesting people, as well as principles. With these definitive truths, the writers are able to make the dialogues shine and establish strong themes throughout the story. Characters talk to you about the things you're going through, talk to you about your motivations, your outlook. There's friction between your personalities. They judge you for traits intrinsic to you. It's meaningful to explore this through V, because V filters these thoughts and ideas through a different, more chaotic lens than me. I personally am not super big on the whole die a legend thing, or becoming besties with a dead, womanizing nuclear terrorist. But when I view the game's narrative through their point of view, part of it makes sense, and I'm better able to connect with the themes of Night City in the ways that they're meant to be seen. There are themes within New Vegas, but the courier is rarely engaging with them personally. These themes are instead expressed through the world building of other characters and the thoughts that they have. It's not a bad thing to express themes through the other characters, but it would be better if the player character were more involved in that process, in ways a little deeper than simply choosing sides in a morally gray conflict with little to no personal input. Go here, do this is the name of the game. And think of the companions in this game. Why do they follow you? Veronica just sees you as someone who looks capable, and she just wants to travel. What a painfully shallow connection. Lily only requires one line asking for help investigating Night Stalker mutations for a quest, and she becomes your companion permanently. When you ask Arcade to join you, he asks the very insightful question, why should I go anywhere with you? The two of you have no ties. He is correct in asking this. If you have a low intelligence, you can make him take pity on you for being such a brainlet, and he will agree to accompany you. Obviously, you're someone in need of help. It's funny, but it's so shallow. This is dumb writing. Boone is almost an exception, but he's only following you because he was wanting to leave town and wander anyway after avenging the death of his wife. It's just easier to travel with you than to wander alone. This guy views you as circumstantially convenient. You're allowed to like these characters, but the means of connecting with them are so primitive solely because of the courier's nature. They could have been so much better. And I'm not calling the writers at Obsidian incompetent. They know how to write character relationships. In their first published game, Knights of the Old Republic 2, all dialogue is filtered through the fact that you are a Jedi, and all connections to companions are impacted by this. It's great! There are power dynamics between Force users and non-Force users. There are interesting relationships between different Force users, conflicts in what they believe in. The restriction of being a Jedi is what lets the writers breathe life into the dialogues you participate in. Restriction is the father of creativity. My friend's dad said that once, and I thought it was really insightful. Without any established rules, how the hell are you supposed to make anything interesting? They should not have made the courier a blank slate. I rest my case. Alright, the roleplay and the dialogues might be a bit underwhelming, but at least we have the freedom to express ourselves in the wasteland by being a murder hobo whenever we want. You can kill literally anyone, and it doesn't mess up the plot. No soft locks or threads of destiny severed. In theory, you can kill the primary faction leaders within an hour of starting the game, without any restrictions. It's super robust. Isn't that great? This ideal of freedom is universally good and contains no drawbacks. Alright, you know the drill by now. I think this was done very poorly. This concept is actually fairly reasonable to uphold as an ideal. Keeping players from killing NPCs because they're deemed too important is obviously a serious restriction of player agency, and it's rightfully controversial whenever a game implements that restriction. I will never claim that this is a good design decision. However, I think that New Vegas implements this open-ended ideal with some severe trade-offs. I think a great example of this is just H.Bomberguy's examples. You can kill Caesar, the leader of one of the major factions, whenever you want, and the world is super reactive. Characters can actually reference this in dialogue. Sure, they don't do anything else, but hey, isn't it cool that the developers know how to set and check flags? I don't know about you, but the world feels really shallow when I can kill literally anyone and nothing changes. The NPCs might be programmed to react, but the price of that cute novelty is that everything I do is entirely inconsequential. The only consequence of killing Caesar is that I can't complete his questline anymore. The plot still plays out exactly the same, but now you see an extra line of dialogue whenever people mention that you did a thing. In fact, the only consequence of killing literally anyone is that you can't accept quests from them anymore because they're dead. Removing these characters from the game doesn't affect the plot because they were never participants in the first place. Nobody has an important role in the story. These characters are just scenery. It might be really well written scenery, but it's still scenery. Think of the plots that you could have had if any of these characters were allowed by the writers to play vital roles. This is an opportunity cost. It makes me wish I was playing a better, more restrictive game. Like Fallout. New Vegas. The Dead Money DLC is the best part of New Vegas because you aren't allowed to kill anyone. The primary antagonist, Elijah, hides behind radio transmission the entire time, so there's no way for the player to threaten sequence breaking the story. You have a bomb strapped to your neck, and if any of the supporting characters die, your head explodes. This is for plot reasons I won't get into, but because of these restrictions, the NPCs are able to perform pivotal functions in the plot. They help you succeed in your goals, because you cannot pull off the heist of the Sierra Madre by yourself, and they can't pull it off without you. Thanks to bomb collar coercion, all of you share a vendetta against Elijah and are forced to carry out his will under threat of death. Any background you may have had before this is irrelevant. What matters now is survival. Funnily enough, this new context completely bypasses all of my earlier complaints of the courier being an unwritten character. Suddenly, I have new character motivations that can create both alliances and friction with other characters in the game. I now have the tightly written character interactions I was hoping for. It's difficult for me to play New Vegas proper without a glazed over look in my eyes, but Dead Money completely defies this. In the third act, there are scripted confrontations with these companions, and these incredible interactions would not be guaranteed if you weren't railroaded by a bomb caller into interacting with them and keeping them alive. Despite all of the constraints the game puts upon you, this DLC is widely regarded as a fan favorite, especially because of its story and writing. I do not believe these tight plot constraints and strong narrative are coincidental. The mighty Caesar sits upon his throne, and he lacks agency in the plot because the writers need to account for the fact that you could just kill him whenever. They didn't have time to write and program any divergences in the plot, so they didn't include anyone in the plot. Even given their tight deadline, I think the New Vegas devs still could have created independent characters while respecting player agency, instead of this mess where you can kill anyone with zero consequences. There are clever ways of restricting the player without breaking immersion. Is it so contrived to imagine that seeking an audience with the mighty Caesar requires being brought before him in shackles? That's, totally up the Legion's alley. Maybe don't put the elevator access to Mr. House's real body right in the open so that anyone can waltz on in. This guy supposedly calculated the inevitable end of the world. He should be able to calculate that perhaps he shouldn't leave the keys to his basement out in the open. Some NPCs can just be made inaccessible for slaughtering, and that's okay. Or you could make their areas cinematic, no combat zones. They actually did this in the Old World Blues DLC, because they probably recognized it was important for a coherent plot. I think it is appropriate to make these player agency sacrifices in order to uphold the integrity of the game's story. Otherwise you end up with a situation where your choices don't matter at all, and the plot is watered down to be generic as possible. However, even if they did make this improvement, I'm still pretty certain I wouldn't approve of this game's main plot line. Sorry. Everyone lauds Fallout New Vegas for its constant moral ambiguity. H.Bomberguy has an entire section about it even. It is nice to occasionally see quests that don't have you choosing between being a goodly Boy Scout or being comically evil. It is sometimes exhausting to constantly see boring moral binaries in video games, especially in that 2010 zeitgeist. Even Mickey Mouse had a morality binary. Of course New Vegas would turn heads in that environment. But I don't think that's always good. There is no good faction in Fallout New Vegas. That's the point. It's very morally gray. The faction system only asks you to choose the lesser of several evils. Which thing sucks the least? Video essay YouTube would lead you to believe that this is an engaging dilemma. H.Bomberguy uses an example of choosing between petting a dog and killing a dog to show that choices made in strict morality binaries are pretty boring because most people are going to make the same choice. And sure. However, he then makes an argument that doesn't logically follow.
If players are being put in situations where, on the whole, most of them are going to make the same choice, they're not really being given an interesting choice. Video games are more engaging when they ask you something you have to think about.
If you just parse the language here, this is an inverse fallacy. It's not a logically sound argument. I know this is nerd shit, but I gotta use my computer science education somehow. I'm not saying that morally difficult or divisive questions are bad, but I'm strongly disagreeing with the assertion that they're engaging by default. I think morally gray situations can be a lot of fun. Just take a look at Vampire. But I don't think New Vegas gets the same pass. Simply becoming a utilitarian and practicing harm reduction is one of the less engaging moral questions I can think of. Would you rather electrocute a dog or light them on fire? Maybe option C, where you select both at the same time. I bet that question has a lot of variance in what people might select. I bet I could probably devise an answer to that hypothetical. It doesn't mean it's fun or interesting to do so. It requires a level of emotional withdrawal for both options, and I would never make that the plot premise of a video game. I'm not only providing an answer to a hypothetical, I'm carrying it out. I'm simulating it. I'm forced to commit to a deeply unsatisfying option for hours of gameplay. The first time I played this game, I quit when I reached the second act. This is the point where the writers ask you, whose boots would you prefer licking? Would you like the corrupt, overextended, and inefficient democracy that the game character assassinates with every new detail? Perhaps you'd enjoy working for the self-serving, self-aggrandizing, hyper-capitalist, a regular ol' John Galt. He's not incompetent, he's just a massive asshole to you and everyone else. Maybe you'd prefer the Legion, whose defining traits are crucifying all those they consider degenerate and assaulting all of their slaves. H.Bomberguy makes the case that the Legion is morally gray and sympathetic in a brutal way. Caesar makes salient criticisms of liberal democracy. They've completely rooted out crime through brutality, and they've formed a stable society.
You know, they're bad and they crucify people, but at least there's no crime. Can't argue with results.
Not to outwoke Mr. Bomberguy, but he conveniently omits the whole crimes against women thing entirely in this section, which would cancel out his "these guys don't have crime" claim. He doesn't even mention it euphemistically, he just kind of focuses on the fact that they kill people. It genuinely surprised me, so I thought I'd mention it as an aside. Regardless, I still think the argument stands. There may be reasons to engage with the way Caesar and his Legion thinks, in spite of how vile they may be. They aren't entirely illegitimate. But just because factions have shreds of legitimacy doesn't mean being obligated to support one of them is fun. These factions are gray as can be, and they're certain to ensure that you don't feel comfortable in supporting any of them. Isn't it fun having several bad options? But you know, it did occur to me that I'm missing something here. All of these factions may be problematic to side with on the personal ethical grounds of most players with a pulse, but who cares what I think? What would my character want? This is a role-playing game! Doy! I've roleplayed as fascistic, morally reprehensible characters before. I'm best buddies with a womanizing nuclear terrorist. Maybe based on my character's background, I would have reasonable motivations outside of obligation to the plot to align with one of these groups, even if I personally find them detestable.
No connections to hold the players down. No ideals to restrict the player and their unlimited agency to commit to whatever they want. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that cool?
Yeah, they fucking screwed the pooch on this one. They screwed it. The writers don't offer any incentives other than, well, you gotta side with somebody. That's the whole point of the game. Here, follow one of these 10 quest markers and turn your brain off. Obligation is the death of fun. I'm 99% certain that it was Brennan Lee Mulligan, Mr. Roleplay himself, that said that somewhere, but I couldn't find the clip.
I think it's so brave of you to say that players don't deserve agency or choices.
The Courier is not offered any meaningful stake within any of these groups, and so the writers aren't able to provide any strong pitches on behalf of any of the factions. Mr. House offers you a pathetic sum of 1,000 caps and a holier-than-thou attitude. Caesar just calls you to his camp because you're a real go-getter who gets things done. Ambassador Crocker simply suggests that you have a civic duty to the NCR. These are weak pitches. There is nothing that any of these groups can even stand to take away from the Courier, because the Courier has nothing. No homeland to defend, no homeland to uplift. The Courier isn't bought into the game. They didn't bring any chips to the table. You would think that developers of a game taking place in Vegas would understand how stakes work. The Courier just wants to get revenge on Benny. The inspiration well dries up pretty quickly past that. This faction conflict is a complete tangent to Benny's plotline. The writers gave themselves nothing to work with. In Disco Elysium, there was this particular string of dialogue that stood out for me, at least for the purposes of this video. That game has an interesting quote for every minute of playtime. You can talk with this little girl outside a bookstore about different types of stories, and you're able to ask about romance and the genre's tropes. She describes them as stories about a rich lady choosing between a good man and a bad man. What about when both men are bad?
These are not very common. You can't have a choice between bad and bad. Nobody wants to read a story like that.
What if it's written really well?
Well, maybe then it's fine. Maybe if the lady then decides not to pick either, because she doesn't need a bad man. Yes, that would be interesting.
Not picking either. Huh. It really is no small wonder that the most popular option is being a boring, fence-sitting centrist and disregarding all of them to become an autocrat with the aid of a character so frictionless his name is fucking Yes Man. A complete and total cop-out. They wrote their factions so compellingly that the most popular choice is to not engage with them at all. I imagine that if they removed the yes man option, more players would have recognized just how brutally uncompelling this faction conflict is for the player to engage in. A question being morally vague doesn't upgrade it to being fun or engaging. It's grating. New Vegas is just a shitty trolley problem. So what do you choose? Elon Musk, the failing democracy, the cop-out, or the turbo squad? I chose to not play the game. I have other gripes for pieces of this game's design and writing, but they didn't really fit coherently into the script. They're either short, nitpicky, or already derivative. You guys are smart. You already knew that the Lonesome Road DLC was horrendous. I don't need to ramble about that. And if you made it this far, I already know you pushed the subscribe button because you're pure of heart. Thanks for watching all the way through. Have a good one. I'll see you in 1 billion weeks.
Patrolling the Mojave almost makes you wish for a nuclear winter.